The rain hammered against the palace windows like 1,000 urgent fingers. Inside the East Wing corridor, Sergeant James Whitmore stood at attention, his boots polished to mirrors, his rifle held firm. He had been a royal guard for 12 years. He had protected diplomats, dignitaries, and members of the royal family without question. But tonight, something felt wrong. The corridor was too quiet. The usual hum of palace staff had faded hours ago. Only the distant tick of the grandfather clock and the storm outside filled the silence. James shifted his weight slightly. His eyes remained forward, but his mind wandered to his own son, asleep miles away in a small cottage near Windsor. Then came the footsteps, sharp, deliberate, echoing down the marble hall. 2 men in dark suits appeared from the shadows. Behind them, a figure James recognized immediately. Lord Edmund Harcourt, the king's senior advisor. His face was stone, his eyes cold and calculating. Sergeant Whitmore, Lord Harcourt's voice cut through the silence like a blade. James snapped to attention. Sir, you are to escort Prince George from his mother's quarters immediately. The king's orders. The words hung in the air like smoke. James felt his chest tighten. Prince George was only 7 years old. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been ill for days. The boy had barely left her side. Sir, with respect, James began carefully. The princess is not your concern, Lord Harcourt interrupted. His tone was ice. The king has made his decision. The boy is to be moved to the North Wing. Tonight, you will carry out this order, or you will be relieved of duty. James felt sweat forming under his collar despite the cold. Behind the heavy oak door to his right, he could hear nothing, but he knew Catherine was in there. He knew Prince George was curled up beside her, finally asleep after hours of worry. Before you hear what happens next. If you love real stories that touch the heart, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. James looked at Lord Harcourt, then at the 2 men flanking him. Their hands rested near their belts. This wasn't a request. This was a threat. The king himself has signed the order, Lord Harcourt said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. The royal seal gleamed in the dim light. The boy is to be separated from his mother. Immediately. James's hand tightened around his rifle. 12 years of service. 12 years of following orders without question, but this felt like cruelty dressed up as duty. Why? The word left his mouth before he could stop it. Lord Harcourt's eyes narrowed. That is not your question to ask, Sergeant. The boy is 7 years old. His mother is sick. He's scared. And the king is his grandfather. The child will be cared for. But something in Lord Harcourt's tone didn't sit right. James had heard whispers in the barracks, rumors of tension within the royal family, of disagreements behind closed doors, of the king's growing impatience with Catherine's influence over her son. This wasn't about care. This was about control. James stood frozen. His duty screamed one thing. His heart screamed another. Behind that door was a frightened boy and his sick mother, and he was being ordered to tear them apart. The clock ticked louder. The storm raged harder, and Sergeant James Whitmore had to make a choice that would change everything. Asterisk, asterisk, open the door, Sergeant. Lord Harcourt's voice was sharp now, losing its thin veneer of patience. James didn't move. His mind raced through possibilities, through consequences, through the faces of his own family, his wife, his son, his pension. Everything he had built could disappear with one word, but then he heard it. A sound so small he almost missed it beneath the storm. A child's whimper, muffled, scared. Prince George. Sir, James said slowly, choosing each word with care. Protocol requires that I verify direct orders of this nature with the captain of the guard. Lord Harcourt's face flushed red. You dare question the king's authority? I question nothing, sir. I follow protocol. A child cannot be removed from a parent's custody without dual authorization. Security Protocol 7B, it's been palace law for 40 years. It was a gamble. James knew the protocol existed, but it was rarely enforced. Most guards wouldn't even remember it. But Lord Harcourt wasn't a guard, and in that moment of hesitation, James saw it. A flicker of uncertainty in the advisor's eyes. "The king's word supersedes protocol," one of the suited men said. "Stepping forward? Not when it concerns the safety of a royal child," James replied, his voice steady now. "Those protocols were written after the incident in 1983. They cannot be overridden, not even by the king." The silence that followed was deafening. The storm seemed to pause. The clock seemed to stop. Lord Harcourt's jaw clenched so tight James could hear his teeth grinding. "You are making a grave mistake, Sergeant Whitmore." "Sir, but it's mine to make." Behind the door, another sound. Footsteps, light, barefoot against wood. Then a woman's voice, weak but firm. "What's happening out there?" "Catherine." Lord Harcourt moved toward the door, but James stepped sideways, blocking his path. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defiant. It was simply immovable. "Ma'am," James called through the door, his eyes never leaving Harcourt's. "There's nothing to worry about. Please rest." I heard voices. "Is someone trying to take George?" The question landed like a hammer. No pretense now. No royal formality. Just a mother's fear, raw and real. Lord Harcourt's face twisted into something ugly. "Stand aside, Sergeant." "That is a direct order." "I cannot comply, sir. You will be court-martialed. You will lose everything." "I understand, sir." The two men in suits moved closer. James could see their hands moving to their belts. One of them whispered something into a radio. Backup was coming. This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated, but then the door opened. Catherine stood in the doorway, pale and trembling, wrapped in a silk robe. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red from crying, or illness, or both. But she stood tall. Behind her, barely visible in the dim light of the room, was Prince George. His small hand clutched the back of her robe. "Lord Harcourt," Catherine's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of royalty. "Explain yourself, Your Highness." "The king has requested." "The king," she interrupted, "is not a doctor. My son stays with me. He is frightened, and I am ill, and no order from anyone will change that. This is not a request, Your Highness. And this is not a negotiation." The tension in the corridor was suffocating. James could feel his heartbeat in his throat. This was no longer about following orders. This was about power. About family. About what was right. Lord Harcourt's eyes darted between Catherine, James, and the child hidden behind his mother. For a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "Very well," he said quietly. "But know this, Sergeant Whitmore. You have chosen your side, and there will be consequences." He turned sharply, his coat swirling behind him. The two men followed, their footsteps fading down the corridor like a retreating storm. But James knew this wasn't over. It was only beginning. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Catherine's hand found James's shoulder. It was brief. A touch that lasted barely a second. But in it, he felt gratitude, relief, fear. "Thank you," she whispered. James nodded. "Ma'am, you should rest. I'll remain posted here." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, carried too much weight. "They'll come for you now. You know that, don't you?" "I know, ma'am. Why did you do it?" "You could have just followed orders. You have a family." James glanced down at Prince George, who was peeking around his mother's robe. The boy's eyes were wide, frightened, but there was something else there, too. Trust. "Do you have a family, ma'am?" "That's exactly why I couldn't let them take him." Catherine's eyes glistened. She pulled George close and retreated back into the room. The door closed softly, leaving James alone in the corridor once more. The storm outside had weakened to a steady rain. The palace settled back into its uneasy quiet. But James knew the calm wouldn't last. 20 minutes later, footsteps again. Heavier this time. Multiple sets. James straightened, his hand instinctively moving to his rifle. Captain Maurice appeared first, flanked by 4 guards. The captain was a hard man, weathered by 30 years of service. His face was unreadable. Sergeant Whitmore. Sir, you've been relieved of duty? Surrender your weapon. James had expected this, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. He unslung his rifle slowly, handed it to one of the guards. I was following protocol. I know what you were doing. Sergeant Captain Morris stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And I know why you did it. But that doesn't change the situation. Lord Harcourt has filed a formal complaint. The king wants you removed from the palace grounds immediately. The king knows? The king knows everything that happens in this palace. The captain paused, something flickering in his eyes. But between you and me, James, you did the right thing. James blinked. Sir, I said you did the right thing, but that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. You're suspended pending investigation. Report to headquarters tomorrow morning at 8. Until then, go home. Be with your family. What about the princess? What about Prince George? I'll post guards I trust. They won't be separated tonight. You have my word. Relief washed over James, but it was short-lived. He knew suspension was just the beginning. Court-martial, discharge possibly. Even criminal charges for disobeying a direct order. As he walked down the corridor, escorted by the guards, James passed windows that looked out over the palace gardens. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart. Moonlight spilled across the wet grass. He thought of his son again. What would he tell him? That Daddy lost his job because he refused to take a scared child from his sick mother. Would his son understand? Would his wife? The palace gates loomed ahead. Beyond them, the real world. The world where royal guards who disobeyed orders didn't get second chances. But as James stepped through those gates, something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows near the guardhouse. A woman in a hooded coat. She approached quickly, her face hidden. Sergeant Whitmore. James tensed. Who's asking? She pulled back her hood. It was Lady Margaret, one of Catherine's senior attendants. Her face was urgent, worried. I need you to know something, she said quickly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. What happened tonight? It wasn't just about moving Prince George to another wing. What do you mean? Lord Harcourt has been building a case for months. He wants Catherine declared unfit. He wants George removed from her care permanently. Tonight was a test. If he could take the boy without resistance, it would set a precedent. James felt ice in his veins. On what grounds? They claim her illness is psychological, that she's unstable, that she's influencing the boy against the king and the institution. Lady Margaret's voice shook. It's lies. All of it. But if they can separate them, even once, they can do it again. And again. Until George forgets who his mother really is. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first person who stood up to them. And because, she hesitated, because there are others in the palace who know the truth, who see what's happening. But we're afraid to speak. James processed this information. What he'd thought was a single order, a single night, was actually part of something much larger, much darker. What do they want from me? Nothing. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. More than you realize. Before James could respond, Lady Margaret pulled her hood back up and disappeared into the night. James stood there, rain dripping from the trees, the palace glowing behind him. He'd lost his position. Maybe his career. But he'd done something that couldn't be undone. He'd shown them that some orders shouldn't be followed. James didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small kitchen, a cup of cold tea in front of him, watching the dawn break through the window. His wife Emma had listened to everything. She hadn't cried, hadn't yelled. She'd just held his hand. We'll figure it out, she'd said. We always do. But James knew this was different. Royal guards who crossed the institution didn't just lose their jobs. They lost their reputations, their futures, sometimes even their freedom. At 7:30, he put on his uniform one last time. Emma kissed him at the door. Their son Tommy was still asleep upstairs. Come home to us, Emma whispered. I will. The headquarters building was gray and imposing. James had walked through its doors 1,000 times. But today it felt different. Hostile. Like the building itself was judging him. Inside, he was directed to a conference room on the 3rd floor. The walk down the corridor felt like a funeral march. Other guards he passed wouldn't meet his eyes. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked disgusted. He'd broken the code. And everyone knew it. The conference room was stark. A long table. Several chairs. And 3 men already seated. Captain Maurice. A military lawyer James didn't recognize. And in the center, General Sir Richard Pemberton, head of Royal Security. The general was a legend. 40 years of service, decorated, feared, and notoriously loyal to the crown. "Sit down, Sergeant Whitmore." The general's voice was gravel and steel. James sat. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered. "Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" the general asked. "Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order from Lord Harcourt, a senior advisor to the king. You obstructed official palace business. You created a confrontation that could have escalated into violence. Do you deny any of this?" "No, sir." "Then you admit your guilt?" James took a breath. "I admit that I refused an order that violated established protocol. Security Protocol 7B clearly states, I know what the protocol states, Sergeant." The general's eyes were cold. "But protocols are guidelines. The king's word is law, not when it concerns the welfare of a child, sir." The room went silent. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Captain Morris stared at the table. "You believe you know better than the king what's best for his grandson?" The general's voice was dangerously quiet. "I believe I know when an order is wrong, sir. Wrong." The general repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "And what qualifies you to make that judgment?" James met his gaze directly. "I'm a father, sir, and what I was ordered to do, I couldn't do to any child. Not for any reason." The general leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled out a file, opened it. Inside were papers, photographs, documents James couldn't quite see. "This file," the general said slowly, "contains witness statements from last night. Lord Harcourt claims you were insubordinate, aggressive, and potentially unstable. He's requesting you be dishonorably discharged and prosecuted." James felt the floor drop out from under him. However, the general continued, "I also have statements from Captain Morris, from the guards who escorted you out, and from Lady Margaret, who somehow managed to submit a formal testimony this morning." James's breath caught. "They all tell a different story. They describe a guard who followed protocol, who showed restraint, who protected a child and his mother from what could be interpreted as overreach." The general closed the file. He stood, walked to the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room. "I've served the crown for 40 years, Sergeant. I've followed orders I didn't agree with. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I've never been asked to separate a sick mother from her frightened child in the middle of the night." He turned back to face James. "What Lord Harcourt asked you to do was not an order. It was a test. A test to see how far he could push, how much power he really has. And you, Sergeant Whitmore, failed his test, which means you passed mine." James didn't dare hope, didn't dare breathe. "You're not being discharged. You're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll serve directly under Captain Morris in the princess's security detail. Your job is to ensure that what happened last night never happens again." Relief crashed over James like a wave, but confusion followed quickly.
"How, sir? I don't understand."
"Lord Harcourt. Lord Harcourt does not run royal security. I do, and I decide who protects the royal family. If he has a problem with that, he can take it up with me." The general extended his hand. James stood, shook it. "Don't make me regret this, Sergeant." "I won't, sir." As James left the building, the sun was fully up. The world looked different, brighter. He pulled out his phone, called Emma. "I'm coming home," he said, "and I still have a job." He could hear her crying on the other end. Happy tears. But as James walked to his car, he noticed something. A black sedan parked across the street. Tinted windows. engine running, and in the driver's seat, just barely visible, a figure watching him. Lord Harcourt's people. The general might have saved his job, but the war was far from over. 3 days passed. James returned to the palace, this time assigned permanently to the East Wing, Catherine's wing. He stewed his posts, filed his reports, and kept his eyes open. The other guards treated him differently now, some with respect, others with suspicion. He'd become a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. On the 4th day, something changed. James was performing a routine corridor check when he heard voices coming from the library. Raised voices. Angry. He approached cautiously. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, he could see Catherine, standing rigid, her face pale but determined. Across from her stood the king himself. James had never seen His Majesty up close. He was shorter than he appeared in photographs, but his presence filled the room. His face was red with anger. "You have embarrassed this family," the king's voice thundered. "Your behavior, your illness, your refusal to cooperate, my refusal to let you take my son, you mean?" Catherine's voice shook, but didn't break. "George needs structure, discipline. You coddle him. You fill his head with love, with security, with the knowledge that his mother won't abandon him. His mother is unstable. The doctors have said, the doctors you chose, who tell you what you want to hear." James knew he should walk away. This was a private conversation, a family matter. But something kept him rooted to the spot. "I am trying to protect him," the king said, his voice lowering dangerously. "From you?" The words hung in the air like poison. Catherine's hand gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. "You're trying to control him," she said quietly. "Because you couldn't control his father? Because you couldn't control me. So now you want to mold George into what you think he should be. But he's a child. He's my child. And I won't let you break him the way this family breaks everyone." A silence, heavy and suffocating. Then the king noticed the door, noticed James standing there. Their eyes met. James felt ice in his stomach. "You," the king said. "You're the guard. The one who refused Lord Harcourt." James stepped into the doorway, stood at attention. "Yes, Your Majesty. You make a habit of eavesdropping on private conversations?" "I was performing a security sweep, sir." I heard raised voices. "Protocol requires I investigate any potential disturbance." It was true, technically, but they both knew he'd been listening. The king studied him. "What's your name?" "Sergeant James Whitmore, sir." "Sergeant Whitmore? The man who thinks he knows better than his king?" "I think I know right from wrong, sir." Catherine gasped softly. No one spoke to the king like that. No one. But the king didn't explode. Instead, something unexpected happened. He smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of a predator who'd found something interesting. "You have children, Sergeant?" "A son, sir. 8 years old." "Then, you understand. The weight of wanting to protect them. The fear of failing them." "I do, sir." "Then you understand why I must ensure George is prepared for what he'll face. This family, this institution, it will devour him if he's weak. His mother's sentimentality won't save him. Only strength will." James chose his words carefully. "With respect, sir, strength without love is just cruelty. And cruelty makes children hard, not strong." The king's smile faded. "You overstep, Sergeant." "Sir. But you asked me a question." I answered honestly. For a long moment, no one moved. The air crackled with tension. Then the king turned back to Catherine. "This conversation isn't over." He walked toward the door, toward James. As he passed, he stopped. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Sergeant Whitmore. I haven't decided which." "Neither have I, sir." His footsteps echoed down the corridor. James remained standing, his heart hammering so hard he was sure Catherine could hear it. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "Probably not, ma'am. I'll have you dismissed now. Or worse. Maybe." Catherine moved closer. In the morning light streaming through the library windows, she looked tired. Worn down, but still fighting? Why? She asked. Why do you keep risking everything? James thought of his son. Of the bedtime stories, the scraped knees kissed better, the nightmares chased away. He thought of what it meant to be a parent. To protect. To love without condition. Because someone has to, ma'am. And it might as well be someone who has something to lose. Makes it mean more. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She quickly wiped them away. George asked about you yesterday. The guard who wouldn't let the bad men take him? That's how he put it. The bad men. James's throat tightened. He wants to thank you. Would you come to tea tomorrow? Just for a few minutes. It would mean so much to him. Tea with a princess and a prince. It violated about a dozen protocols. But then again, James had already violated so many. What was one more? I'd be honored, ma'am. She smiled. A real smile. The first he'd seen from her. 3:00. The conservatory. And Sergeant, don't wear your uniform. Come as yourself. As James walked back to his post, felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. But in the shadows of the palace, wheels were turning. Lord Harcourt had heard about the library confrontation, and he was preparing his next move. The conservatory was filled with afternoon light. Glass walls looked out over the rose gardens, where the last flowers of autumn still clung to life. James arrived in civilian clothes, feeling strangely exposed without his uniform. Catherine was already there, pouring tea. Prince George sat beside her, his legs swinging beneath the chair. When he saw James, his face lit up. You're the guard. The one who stayed. James smiled. I am. You can call me James. Mummy says you were very brave. Your mummy is braver than I'll ever be. George considered this seriously, then nodded. She is. She's the bravest person I know. They sat. Drank tea. Ate small sandwiches that probably cost more than James made in a week, but the expensive setting faded away as they talked. George told him about his studies, his favorite books, his dog. He was just a boy. Scared sometimes. Excited about small things. Completely unaware of the power struggles swirling around him.
Oh, do you have children?
George asked suddenly. I do. A son about your age. Tommy. What's he like? A lot like you, actually. Curious, kind, asks too many questions. George grinned. Mummy says questions are how we learn. Your mummy is very wise. Catherine watched them, her hands wrapped around her teacup. There was such sadness in her eyes, but also something else. Gratitude. Hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. George, she said gently, why don't you go pick some flowers for the table? The boy jumped up eagerly, running out to the garden. Catherine waited until he was out of earshot. You're going to try again, she said quietly. Lord Harcourt, the king, they won't stop. I know, ma'am. General Pemberton can only protect you so much. If they push hard enough, if they make it about the institution rather than about right and wrong, I understand the risks. Her voice was sharp now. Do you understand what they'll do? They'll dig into your life, your family. They'll find anything they can use against you. A parking ticket, a debt, a comment you made 10 years ago. They'll twist it. They'll destroy you to prove a point. Let them try. Catherine set down her cup. You don't have to do this. I can ask for a different guard. Someone less visible, but you won't, because you know I won't back down. She met his eyes. I'm asking you to think about your family. Your son? What happens to them if you lose everything? James looked out at George, who was carefully selecting flowers, his tongue sticking out in concentration. He thought of Tommy doing the same thing in their small garden. Both boys, innocent and unaware of how cruel the world could be. I teach my son to stand up for what's right, James said slowly. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs something. If I walk away now, what am I teaching him? That principles only matter when they're convenient. I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm giving you permission to. I'm respectfully declining, ma'am. Sound from the doorway. They both turned. Captain Morris stood there, his face grim. "Ma'am, Sergeant, I need a word." James stood. So did Catherine. The captain's expression told them this wasn't good news. "Lord Harcourt has filed formal charges against Sergeant Whitmore. Conduct unbecoming, insubordination," and paused, "unauthorized contact with members of the royal family." Catherine's face went pale. "This tea was authorized. I invited him. Doesn't matter, ma'am. He's claiming the sergeant has overstepped his bounds, that he's become emotionally involved, that he's compromised security. That's absurd." "It's strategic, ma'am." The captain looked at James. "You're being suspended again. Pending a full investigation. This time I can't protect you." James felt the world tilting. How long? Could be weeks. Could be months. And at the end of it, the captain didn't finish. He didn't have to. George came running back in, his hands full of flowers. He stopped when he saw their faces. "Is something wrong?" Catherine knelt down, took the flowers, forced a smile. "Nothing, darling. These are beautiful. Go wash your hands before dinner." George looked at James. "Will you come back and visit?" James's throat was tight. "I hope so, buddy. Promise?" How do you promise something to a child when you don't know if you can keep it? How do you break a 7-year-old's heart with honesty? "I promise I'll try," James said finally. It was the best he could do. That evening, James went home. Emma was waiting. So was Tommy. They ate dinner as a family, and James told them everything. Tommy listened with wide eyes, then asked the question James had been dreading. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" James looked at his son. At his wife? At the life they'd built together. It wasn't much. A small house. Used furniture. But it was theirs. And it was real. "I don't know, buddy. But I did the right thing. And sometimes that has to be enough." 3 weeks later, the investigation concluded. James was found guilty of conduct unbecoming and unauthorized familiarity with members of the royal family. He was dishonorably discharged. No pension. No references. 12 years of service gone. But on his last day, as he was clearing out his locker, an envelope appeared. No name. Just his locker number. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "Sergeant Whitmore, you showed me that courage isn't about following orders. It's about knowing when not to. George talks about you still. About the guard who stayed. And I want you to know that because of what you did, I found my own courage. I've filed for legal separation from the institution's control over my son. It's a long fight ahead. But I'm fighting. Because you showed me how. Thank you for being the man who wouldn't just follow orders. Thank you for being the man who chose love over duty. You'll never wear a uniform again, but you'll always be a true guard. Never den by but of what matters. With deepest gratitude, Catherine." James folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket, and walked out of the palace for the last time. He'd lost his career, his reputation, his security, but he'd gained something more valuable. He'd shown his son and Prince George, and maybe even a future king, that some things are worth the cost. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. And as James drove home, past the palace gates, to the ordinary world where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, he realized something. He wasn't a hero. He was just a father who'd made a choice. But sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.